So I was born in Harbour Magna, a maternity home. It's probably about 10 miles from Rugby, and you might see a photo or two of me when I was just a tiny baba. Um, and then I went to live with my mum and dad, of course, and my sister Anne and brother Pete in Anderson Avenue. I should mention perhaps that I was in fact an accident. Pete is 10 years older than me and Anne is 12 years older than me. So, yes, I was a bit unforeseen, but nevertheless, a great delight to the receiving parents and siblings. So, yes, Anderson Avenue, that was my first memory, really. Mum and Dad lived in a rented house there, and I don't remember too much, in honesty, about my childhood. I do remember Anderson Avenue being a very cold place. There was no central heating. Although it did have electricity and gas, it had no central heating. And in winter, when winters used to be a lot harder and harsher than they are nowadays, we used to end up with frost on the inside of the windows, never mind the outside. And it wasn't very comfortable, in all honesty. But anyway, one of the things I do remember was I used to suffer a lot from tonsillitis and earache as a result. And as a result of that, I got taken to the Hospital of St Cross in Rugby. I would guess I was probably maybe 5 or 6, 7, maybe 7, 6, I think probably 6 years old, to have my tonsils out. Because obviously the doctor thought that it was the only way that it was going to be remedied. So I ended up in the Hospital of St Cross in Rugby, had my tonsils removed, and I'll never ever forget the very first morning after the operation, looking forward to breakfast, as you do as a 6-year-old. I was presented with cornflakes and kippers. Now, bear in mind that having just had tonsils out, my throat was extremely sore. Far sore, more sore, more sore than just a sore throat. And I was in absolute agony. I just couldn't cope with it. And Mum and Dad complained, I know, to the hospital staff and said, "What on earth are you doing giving our young child cornflakes and kippers for his breakfast when he just had his tonsils out?" "Oh, well, it hardens the skin," I remember, was the answer that they gave. Well, that put me off kippers, I can tell you, for the rest of my life. I've never ever touched a kipper since. I was never allowed to play out in the street. There were one or two other boys that lived locally. There was one fellow, Thompson, I can't remember his Christian name now, but Mum and Dad were a bit snobbish in a way, and they always thought that the Thompson family were a bit sort of, beneath them. This boy's father always used to spit a lot, and anyway, Mum and Dad disapproved of me meeting up with them very much, so I was confined to the garden for much of the time, and it wasn't a particularly large garden, but we did have chickens, I remember, in the early days. It had an outside loo, and behind the outside loo was a chicken run. So we used to get fresh eggs on a reasonably regular basis, which was nice. But we all lived there as a happy family. And I was fortunate, really, because when I eventually went to school, primary school, Rokeby Primary School, it was almost directly opposite where we lived. So I would literally just come out of the house, walk across the road and into the school grounds. It was quite good times at Rokeby, apart from when they had a swimming pool built. and they started to teach us to swim with floats in the water. And I've always had this fear of water. And I can remember being absolutely terrified, having to jump in for the very first time and trying to swim. I could never really get to grips with swimming, in all honesty, and never have done since. But anyway, it was a good school. It had a massive playground. And one of the things I really enjoyed doing at primary school there was playing marbles. And the playground, dotted around the playground were various drain hole covers. You can imagine, obviously, for soaking the rain away, there'd be tarmac pointing down into the drain covers. And there were a group of us who used to play marbles on a quite regular basis. And I became quite skilled and proficient at marbles, to be honest. You'd stand a distance away from the drain cover, and then you decide to play with maybe 2 marbles each, or maybe 4 marbles each, or even 10 marbles each, if your hands could cope with 10 marbles at a time. And the idea was to try and shove or flick, using your little finger and thumb, flick the marbles from where they landed into the drain cover. And the person that finished up with all of the marbles in the drain cover was the one that won that particular game and pocketed all of the marbles. And then you go back and you start another game. Well, I managed to, I think, accumulate just under 1,000 marbles. And they're all in a great big cake tin, which currently is in the garage. But it's a prized possession of mine. It was one of the things I ever really won. And so I looked after them and marvelled at the wonderful colours inside. Favourite drink? Chateau d'Oeuf de Pape, red wine. Or white wine, Gewürztraminer, Alsace Gewürztraminer. And pre-dinner drink, Campari. With orange. A favourite film, Godfather. I don't watch many films these days. I ought to watch more, really. But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I always loved Charlie Chaplin films, silent movies. Goodness me, favourite country. You rattle off a whole load. New Zealand, got to be probably the top. South Africa, Finland, Corsica, Norway. Probably bottom of the list will be Bulgaria, where I went skiing one year. The only time I've ever been skiing. It was when I was a student. And somebody persuaded me, why don't you go skiing? And I went on my own. And it was absolutely appalling. I couldn't understand a word of the language. This was a time when Bulgaria was behind the Iron Curtain, or still part of the Russian Empire, as it were. Couldn't understand a word of the language. Lived on goulash, which was their main food source. The snow conditions were appalling. And there's almost a continual mist up in the mountains. So I couldn't learn to ski because I couldn't understand what the instructors were telling me. I've always wanted to go to Vienna. That's something I would really like to do. There's something about Vienna that appeals. I have this vision of there's a famous palace, isn't there, on the outskirts of Vienna. I can't just remember the name of it now, but there's a famous palace on the outskirts of Vienna. But there's also the Danube, of course, that flows through Vienna, and I just love the blue Danube. The piece of music, and I just have this vision of being able to, lie back on a river cruise in the sunshine, listening to the Blue Danube. But you Queen. Favourite band, Queen, always up there. Freddie Mercury, what a singer, what an absolute legend. Yeah, greatest loss to the music industry, dear old Freddie. There've been quite a few, in all honesty. Different types of music. I quite like different types of music. I like certain types of classical music. I mentioned the Blue Danube. My favourite classical piece of music is Beethoven's Emperor Suite piano, which always makes me tearful. And even mentioning the name, I can feel it welling up now. It's just a beautiful, beautiful piece of music. Queen. Who else is there? There's the Rolling Stones, Status Quo. We had good times. I can remember Vicky and TJ jumping about on the settees in the lounge when we were blasting out Status Quo. And we went to see them live in concert. Mind you, it was so loud that it was almost distorting. Favourite TV programme? That is very difficult. If you're talking drama, I thought the best drama, probably the best drama I've ever seen is Line of Duty, which was absolutely superb, and the way it was written, one series after another. Although I never got involved in Peaky Blinders, I think people probably feel the same way about that as well. But anyway, Line of Duty for a drama. David Attenborough's series, all of his programmes are just phenomenal. Not just because of the message that's being put across, which is so poignant, but also the camera work is just phenomenal. What they can achieve in all sorts of conditions, climatic conditions. So yeah, I think when it comes to comedy, I thought Ronnie Barker probably was one of the best comedians, in truth. Incredible skills and ability that bloke had, his singing, his acting, very, very clever. John Cleese in Fawlty Towers, Morecambe and Wise, Ken Dodd, bless him, who seemed to go on for years and years and years, Tommy Cooper. Yeah, there've been some good ones. Difficult to pick a winner. Scones, raspberry jam and clotted cream. And Celia's curry. Chicken curry. Mum and Dad met in Cheltenham. Mum was at a cookery college in Cheltenham, and she was there with my dad's sister, as it turned out, Auntie Buddy. And it was Auntie Buddy that actually introduced Dad to Mum, and that was how their relationship started. So my mum and dad had a very tough life, because obviously this goes back to before the war, and they didn't have a lot of money. as people didn't in those days. They lived in a cottage, and again, there was no heating or lighting, I think, for quite a while. But so Anne was the firstborn, and she was born into this sort of environment of quite harsh conditions, and Pete likewise. So they didn't have a lot of luxury, they didn't have a lot of toys and so on. So I was very, very lucky, to be honest, to be born in 1951, so that's post-war, when things were starting to get better after the deprivation of the war years. Dad worked for a firm called English Electric in Rugby, and he was electrical engineering. And he was there until I think about 1963, before he then moved to a firm called Bristol Siddeley Engines in the outskirts of Coventry. Again, electrical engineering. But during the war, Dad, when he was at English Electric, didn't have to go to serve in the forces. Because the work that he was doing was focused on making machines and equipment that ultimately would produce munitions for the war. So as a result, he didn't need to go into the Army, Navy or Air Force. Mum never worked. Mum came from a very well-off family. She was born in Malton in Yorkshire. And her father was a racehorse trainer, name of Botterill, that's Mum's maiden name, and they had quite a nice existence. They lived, I remember, in a big house. I did actually see it once or twice before their Mum's parents passed away, but a very big house. So she was quite well off at that time. But Anne, she worked for a bank in Rugby when I was growing up. Pete, he went to school. Well, he actually got a scholarship from Lawrence Sheriff School, grammar school in Rugby, to rugby school. And he ultimately got then a degree from Cambridge University. So he moved from rugby school to Cambridge University, Queen's College, I remember it was. I always felt to be in the shadow a bit of Pete. He was extremely intelligent, there's no doubt about that. I mean, to get a scholarship from a grammar school after just 2 years, so he would have been, 13 when he got his scholarship. To go to then a public school, which was rugby school, was quite an achievement, in all honesty. And then to go from there to Cambridge University was quite something. So I always felt that I had something to try and live up to, but never ever could. And that weighed, I remember, on my conscience, really, all through my educational life, I think. I could never quite aspire to what he achieved. But anyway, be that as it may, as a family, we used to go on holiday. I remember quite regularly to a place called Broadstairs, and this is right on the tip of Kent, between Margate and Ramsgate. And the 1960s at that time was the time of the mods and rockers. And I remember that I can't remember now which way round it was, but Margate was the focus, I think I'm right in saying, for the mods. Ramsgate was the focus for the rockers. And the two gangs used to embark on all sorts of shenanigans, either in Margate or Ramsgate, but Broadstairs, which was between the two, never seemed to be particularly effective. So it was quite a nice, quiet at that time, coastal town, which had 7 beaches altogether. And we used to stay in a hotel called the Hotel Lancaster, which was right on a promontory overlooking one of the beaches. And I have very, very fond memories of Broadstairs and holidays there. Sometimes with Pete and Anne to start with, but then when they grew up and flew the nest, as it were, I used to go there with Mum and Dad pretty much every summer. And I have quite a soft spot for Broadstairs. I can remember Mr. Merrick and his wife ran this Hotel Lancaster. I had my first transistor radio there, which I used to listen to regularly, because I felt a bit lonely, to be honest. I mean, once Anne and Pete had moved on into their working lives or to university, I was very much there just with Mum and Dad, and all Mum and Dad really seemed to be bothered about was lying in the sun and sunbathing. And leaving me to my own devices, making sandcastles or whatever. But I had my dear old Russian-made, would you believe, transistor radio, which I remember Dad gave me as a present. I can't remember how old I was now, but anyway, I'm religiously listening to this transistor radio. But one of the things I do fondly remember Broadstairs holidays for was there was a pavilion. And you would walk from the Hotel Lancaster, to this pavilion, which is probably about, 3/4 of a mile walk, cliff top walk. And the pavilion used to have a resident band. And Cecil Barker was the guy that actually owned and ran the band. I can't remember much about the other people. There was a drummer and a violinist and a guitarist and a saxophone player. It was quite a good band. But in the evenings, they used to arrange entertainment. And one of the things was the programme that they gave you, and I think this was probably twice a week, from memory. The programme that they gave you at the beginning had a list of all the different song titles from all sorts of things. So there'd be rock and roll songs, there'd be pop tunes, there'd be songs from the shows, song from films, and there'd be maybe 200, maybe more song titles at the beginning of the programme. And one of the competitions that they did was the band would play the introduction to one of these songs, and it would be up to somebody from the audience to actually say which song title it was, find the song title in the list, which were all numbered, and go up onto the stage to Cecil Barker and say, that's song number 179 or that's song number 46. And they'd be presented with a little prize. So I used to love going through this programme each day, memorising what the song titles were and what the numbers were of the song title. And I had to rely on Mum and Dad to actually say, that's so-and-so, that's Rock Around the Clock, or that's from My Fair Lady. And so on. So it was great fun. But the other thing they used to do is they used to have competitions for the adults as well. So they get adults up on stage. I mean, bear in mind that I was only, early teens. I think we're up until my early teens when we went there. But they used to have competitions for the adults, and I remember Mum and Dad on one occasion going up on stage, and Mum had to shave Dad. So this was in the days when you had shaving cream and a razor, an actual handheld razor, not the electric razors that you get now. So Mum would cover Dad's chin with shaving cream, and then have to shave off all the cream. And this would be timed, so there'd be maybe 3, 4, 5 couples up on stage doing the same game. And again, the one who finished the shaving process, finished first, usually ended up with a prize. And it'd be, I don't know, something like a box of chocolates or, box of roses or something of that sort. But it was good fun. It was really, really good entertainment. The daytime was a bit boring sometimes because sometimes we'd just sit in the garden of this pavilion, and while Cecil Barker and his band would be playing music to people just sitting or lying out on the lawn in front of this pavilion, I'd much rather, to be honest, just listen to my transistor radio. But they were good times. They were good times. We had good fun down there. And I can remember, something else. We always had to set off at about 4 o'clock in the morning from our home in Rugby. And in those days, we had an old Ford Zephyr, Zephyr. It was a cream-coloured car with a red roof. And we always had to set off at about 4 o'clock in the morning. And the reason being was that Dad wanted to get through London, because the M25 obviously wasn't built in those days. So we had to go slap bang through the middle of London in order to get down to Kent and on then to Broadstairs. We had to get through London before the rush hour started. So it was roughly when the milkmen were doing their milk rounds, and he always insisted that we had to hit London at about 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, it would take 2 hours roughly to get from Rugby down to London, going in on the Edgware Road and travelling through the middle of London. And actually it was good because it was very quiet in those days. There were hardly any cars. I mean, this would have been the 1960s or 50s, in fact, 50s and 60s. So not even the M1 was fully built at that time. The bottom stage was built, I suppose, in the early 60s, I think. But it was largely travelling on the A5. But it was a long journey. And then we'd get to Broadstairs for about 8 o'clock. 8:30, something like that in the morning, have breakfast, and then check into the hotel. Good times, good times. I was 9 when we uprooted from the rented accommodation at Anderson Avenue, and Mum and Dad bought a house in Tennyson Avenue, which was further out of Rugby. Fond memories of Tennyson Avenue. Oh, the forsythia bush is still there. Well, oh my. Oh. Oh gosh. This wonderful patio. Ding dong, ding dong.
Hello.
Hello.
Come on in.
Thank you. Thank you.
How are you?
My goodness me, this is a trip down memory lane.
Oh yes. Please come in.
Yes, I was saying to my sister, actually, I was talking to her on the phone yesterday, and I said, Anne, do you remember very much about Tennyson Avenue? And we were sort of talking bits and pieces, and I said, I seem to remember the kitchen was quite small for the size of the house. It was quite a small kitchen. The other thing I always remembered, the warm air central heating.
Oh yes, yeah, we got the got all the plans and things for the warm air central heating.
Oh goodness me!
Have a look.
Oh wow! Oh,
That's amazing.
TAC air conditioning. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yes, because the air vents came out from behind you, TJ. There was a vent, I remember. Because when it was very cold, I used to sit down in the corner there.
Oh, did you? Yeah, the vent's still there, but the heating's not there anymore.
No.
What, to keep warm?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, keep warm. Yeah.
Wow. The good old days.
Oh, good old days. Good old days. Dormy 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom luxury house, Wilson. Oh gosh. Oh, that's Dad's writing.
I wondered if there'd be bits and pieces in there.
Yes, that's Dad's writing.
Oh yes, I did wonder. Yeah.
Weights Limited.
Oh.
The basic building cost of the Dormy House, including road, paving and legal charges, is £3,275. A total price of £3,695 allows 420 quid for the purchase of plot. Good gracious me.
You wouldn't get much for
And the rateable,
£3,200 now.
the rateable value will be in the region of £40, and Dad's put £52 next to that. Wow. Because we originally, they moved from Anderson Avenue.
Oh yes, yeah.
Um,
What you were saying, yeah.
And so I was there from till 1960,
Okay.
and then moved in here in 1960.
Was it 1975?
But I can remember the trips that we used to make from Anderson Avenue, because Mum and Dad were very keen on keeping tabs on the builders,
Okay.
you know, to make sure that the specifications were, you know, all being adhered to.
All right. Okay. Yeah, because in here there's a date of 1954, isn't there? Was that?
Yeah.
That might have been the date when they started to
Yeah.
purchase.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's their signatures there, though.
James Bradley, yes, and Joan, that was my mother,
Yeah.
yes, in 1954. So yeah, so I left here in 1973.
There you go.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 75.
I left here in 1973, and my first job was in Leicester with the Royal Insurance Company.
All right.
When the family were all together, because my brother, who's 10 years older than I am, my sister is 12 years older than I am, so I was the accident of the family. But Anne, my sister, had the downstairs room on the left as we
Oh, the
look
little
at
Oh,
it.
little one.
The little
Okay.
one.
Yeah.
Mum and Dad had the one at the front on the ground floor.
Okay. Right.
Pete had the upstairs room, and when he left to go to university, we had a table tennis table.
Oh,
I
I
can
see.
remember playing table tennis
All right.
for
In the front
ages.
bedroom.
In the front, yes,
Okay,
the upstairs
upstairs, yeah.
bedroom.
Yeah, the big rooms, aren't they, up there?
And then I had the room at
Okay.
the back
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
But
you
I
welcome
always
them.
remember the long storage
Yes.
cupboard.
Oh yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, they're
going-
jam packed there.
Yes, I'm afraid you can open the door, but that's about as far as you go in now.
But I think when we first moved here, I have fond memories of my brother-in-law, that's Anne's hubby, Donald, because this was all sort of virgin land, really, as you can imagine, with brand new building
Okay.
on a new estate. And he used to double dig, would you believe, the land, the back
Oh, I see.
garden.
Oh right.
And I just have visions of him stripped to the waist in a sort of 4-foot trench, or double digging all the way around the garden. Extraordinary things how they stick in your memory.
Yeah.
Actually, I can remember Mr. Did you know Mr. Mishak?
Oh
Next door.
yes,
In
Keswick and Barbara.
Yes.
Yes, and their son Stephen.
Yes. Well, he only died. I mean, he only died about 5 or 6 years ago. So he was next door to us. Mr.
Really?
Yeah,
Mishak.
yeah.
Yeah.
He must have been a good age.
He
Yeah,
was.
it was about 95, 96. Yeah.
Wow.
He was very
Yeah.
nice.
Wow. Dad was a smoker,
Oh right. Okay.
and Mum and Dad used to have some major rows.
Okay.
I mean, he tried very valiantly to give up, but there were some days when he regressed, if that's the right word. And Mum would be able to detect, you know, whether
Oh,
or
I
not
see.
he'd been naughty. And I remember the passageway here
Okay.
with the
Yeah.
doors closed and them having a major Barney, you know, about, and I'd be up in the bedroom upstairs and thought, oh, here we go again. That's one of the things that I shall always remember. The other thing that I remember was we had an intruder on one occasion.
An intruder.
Yeah. Mum, Dad and I were returning from somewhere. I don't know where we'd been. But we believed that the person was disturbed and was probably in this little patio area out here. Dad was putting the car away in the garage. Mum had come into the house and she was in the bathroom. No, I was in the bathroom and Mum was in the kitchen. And all of a sudden she was aware of somebody running outside, past the kitchen window, past the back door, and Mum shouting to me, somebody's just run past, somebody's just run past, who was it? And I came dashing out and herring up into the garden, and I think he got over the fence at the back into the Oliver's garden, because there was a long driveway out onto Bournemouth Road, and I think whoever it was actually scaled the fence and ran down there. But we think that we disturbed somebody that day. We never had a burglar alarm here. In those days you probably didn't worry too much about break-ins, not like today.
You've got a nice robin in this garden.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
It'd be a great place for birds.
They do, yeah, and we get quite a lot here. Woodpeckers, green woodpecker in the grass, and
How lovely.
Oh, we've not had one of those.
How
pied
lovely.
one comes for the nuts. Get the occasional kestrel that's taken a
Do you?
pigeon,
Yes,
this
yes.
sort of thing.
I can remember I used to use it as a putting green.
Oh well, yes, you wouldn't. It's not very flat now. But,
You were either going to be awesome at golf or rubbish at golf if you're using that as putting green.
yes, if you could
One of the-
predict what it
one
was
of the
going to
two.
do.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a little pathway that used to go round. Oh, it's still there.
Yes.
Yes, still there. Yeah, that's still very much as it was. And I think where the shed is, was where we had the sort of fruit and veg. Oh, the compost heap's still there, still going strong.
Nothing ever changes, eh?
The top right-hand corner, yes, suitably screened. Yeah,
So,
very nice, very nice.
so yeah, when you would have been here, I think all back there was a single house,
It was.
probably about 100 metres
Yes.
from here.
Yes.
And then, well, when was it, Jean? Probably about 6 years ago, 7 years ago they started building. They knocked the
Right.
house down and then built these three.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yes. Yes, it was Mr. and Mrs. Oliver, I remember, who
Okay.
lived in the single house. He
Right.
was an architect.
Right.
But we didn't really have very much to do with them. But yeah, they had their single driveway that went
yes.
out.
So,
onto
so
Bournemouth
now,
Road.
so when that house was still there, they built probably about 4 or 5 right down the end.
Oh, right.
And then eventually they knocked that one down and built 3 more. So this is now a sort of unadopted road at the
Oh,
moment.
okay. Yes, yeah. Yeah. God, this is a bird haven, isn't it? It's lovely. Fantastic. Fantastic. And really quite peaceful. I used to cycle every day from there to school. And I moved on from Rokeby Primary School to Lawrence Sheriff Grammar School, which was right in the middle of Rugby. And I cycled every day, come rain or shine, or even snow. A distance of about 4 miles roughly. And this was at a time when we used to have to go to school on a Saturday morning. I think it was only my first year at Lawrence Sheriff that we had a Saturday morning school, but I hated it because I can remember one of the lessons we used to have was Latin with the headmaster, Mr. Staveley, and I just loathed it. the weekdays weren't too bad, and I think it's fair to say as you grow up and you go through the school, and things get easier, but like any school, you can be subject to bullying, and kids when they're growing up actually can be quite cruel, I think, to each other. So my early days at Lawrence Sheriff, I didn't enjoy particularly, but I enjoyed it much more as I grew older, and particularly when I got to the sixth form, where you were treated by the masters almost as adults. But it was a boys-only grammar school, and it was at a time when you had to call the teacher sir. I don't think there were any female teachers that I can remember. They were all men. And you always had to stand up in the class whenever the teacher came in. And it was at a time when you had to show considerable respect. So it was always sir. Whenever you wanted to speak, you put your hand up, sir. And the teacher would address you by your surname. Bradley, Bush, Bolt, Grieve, that sort of thing. So yeah, it was quite quite hard. There were one or two occasions when I unfortunately was late, because having to cycle 4 miles, I've never been an early bird, but there were one or two occasions when I was late, which didn't go down too well. But anyway, that's by the by. But there were some teachers that you grow quite fond of in a way. And I think the other thing is, as you grow up, there's a tendency to take the mickey out of some of the teachers, and particularly teachers that were coming in to the profession for the very first time. There was one teacher that I remember, a fellow called Mr. Rankin, that's with an R, and he I seem to remember he talked a bit like that, a bit sort of upper class, a bit of an upper class twit, I seem to remember. My name's Rankin, taught English, I believe. But he was subject to quite a lot of ridicule. And one of the boys at the school with whom I had a very close friendship was John Scamp. Wonderful name. He wasn't really a scamp at all. And John was spoilt no end by his parents. He was an only child. But he and I forged quite a strong friendship. And we always used to mimic, I remember, a number of the teachers, including Mr. Rankin. And then there was Mr. Jackson, who was the music teacher, otherwise known as Fluff. I don't know. I think it was the only reason was because he had a sort of fluff of hair at the front of his head. But he was a music, and he always used to have this twitch of his, that sort of. But we used to have music lessons in a quite a big hall, and we used to get up to all sorts of tricks, including making paper aeroplanes and flying paper aeroplanes across to each other. And particularly if you had Mr. Rankin in this particular building, you'd zoom off a paper aeroplane to one of your colleagues in another part of the room. And Mr. Rankin didn't really know how to cope with this irresponsible behaviour from the school kids. So that we used to try and bait him. So those were good times. There were some subjects that I quite enjoyed at school. There were others that I absolutely hated. One of the subjects I really did not like was any form of science subject. And there was one teacher in particular, a Mr. Day, who, he was horrible. He took great enjoyment in disciplining any boy that misbehaved. He would call them out into the front of the class, and sometimes make them put their hand on the table or the desk, and then rap his knuckles with a ruler, which wasn't very nice. The worst thing that he did was to make the boy, if he'd misbehaved, kneel in front of him, and then he would grab the boy by his sideburns and pull him up. I mean, that sort of thing would never obviously be tolerated nowadays, but it was certainly accepted in those days. He was nasty, really nasty. But he taught one of the science subjects. So there was physics, there was chemistry and biology, which I was absolutely useless at. I can't remember which one Day taught. I think it might have been physics. I was more of a language person, really. And what else? I enjoy doing woodwork. In conjunction with another guy, John Capel, apart from making things like stools and odd bits and pieces out of wood, which was quite good fun, John Capel and I eventually decided we wanted to build a canoe. So with the help of Mr. Hurd, who was the woodwork teacher at that time, he managed to source the specific timber that we'd used to form the framework of the canoe, and also the canvas, yellow canvas, that would be wrapped around the outside. So John and I started off making this wonderful canoe. I think this was in the 5th form, and John eventually lost sort of faith in this project, because it seemed to go on for ages and ages, but he lost faith in it at the end. But I carried on my own, and in the end I completed the canoe on my own, and I actually took it, when it was completed, I took it home back to Tennyson Avenue, where we'd store it in the garage, suspended by ropes from the ceiling of the garage, and made myself a trailer, two-wheel trailer, and I used to cycle with this trailer with a canoe on it behind the bike, and go off from home down to the canal, Grand Union Canal, which was, I don't know, 4 or 5 miles away, I suppose. Had great times canoeing in the canoe. I got into the cross-country running team as well, which is quite an achievement, I suppose, because at school, in the winter sports, it was either rugby, hockey, or cross-country running, and we weren't allowed to play football because it's rugby. It had to be rugby football, not association football. So started off playing rugby, and because I was a fairly lean individual, I was always out on the wing, and schoolboy rugby was never very exciting in the snow and the cold and the wet. You stuck out on the wing, very rarely saw the ball. I hated it, absolutely hated it, to the extent that another guy at school, David Bolt, also disliked it. So he and I would go to any lengths basically to bunk off playing rugby. And come up with some excuse like we got a cold or hurt our leg or whatever. But I did on one occasion use the excuse that my brother Pete had been involved in a car accident and was in hospital, so we had to go and see him. And this fed back to the headmaster, Mr. Staveley. Mr. Staveley had taught Pete at rugby school when Pete was there, and he immediately thought, I hope Peter's all right. I better get in touch with his parents. So he contacts my mum and dad and said, I understand Pete's been involved in a serious car accident. The balloon then goes up. I'm hauled before Mr. Staveley, the headmaster, in the company of my parents, to ascertain what on earth is going on and why I've done what I did. Cut a long story short, I ended up switching at that point from rugby to cross-country running, which is something I actually got to enjoy, believe it or not. The loneliness of the long-distance runner, got into the school cross-country running team, and enjoyed it. Well, fortunately, I didn't get any detention. Because of the family connection, and because my parents were there at the meeting with Mr. Staveley, I think, basically my mum and dad, apologised for, my misdemeanour, and basically assured him, that this would never ever happen again, and that therefore we'd draw a line under it. I think they bailed me out, in other words. So I was let off. With no detention.
Were they angry with you?
Oh God, yeah. Oh geez, yeah. I mean, I was given a right lecturing when I got home, and sort of putting the fear of God into me. So I never ever did anything like that again. Remember the quadrangles with the cherry trees, and there's one on the other side, I think, as well. Wow. And through there was the woodworking class, and I think the gymnasium was through there as well. I don't know whether it still is. There used to be a library in here. I don't know whether there still is, because I can remember meeting. This is where we used to hold things like the chess club. In the library in here. And I have a feeling that house there, the Sheriff Centre, I think that might have been where the headmaster's house was, where Staveley used to live. I must admit, I'm quite impressed, really, the way it's all been extended. Yeah. The pavilion, yeah, well, that's right, it was the pavilion that was over there, yes. There used to be an old pavilion because they had the rugby pitch and the cricket pitch here. There was an old pavilion building, and then just behind the pavilion was the Met station. And one or two people used to take great interest in taking, temperature readings, humidity readings, and all that, wind speeds, and all that sort of thing. And it would be fed into, the sort of general meteorological readings for the country. But that's all gone. No more. No more. 1962. I've got to stop and think now. Oh dear me. Am I on any of these photos?
I'll tell you now, you are on one of them.
I am on.
I've found you already.
Have you really?
Yeah, when I came the first time, I found you.
Oh my goodness.
Took me ages and ages and ages, but I found you.
Oh, bet it did. And is it on one of these? It is on one. Is it further over here? Oh, gracious me. 2005? No, there won't be that one. What was that one? Hasn't got a year on that one. 58, 1940, 1966. Oh, crikey. It might have been on here. Oh, my. Now, that is Mr. Lay. Eggy Lay, we used to call him. That's Mr. Staveley, that's Mr. Skeet, that's Mr. Nason, who used to teach geography. Quarter page paper note. Does that mean?
Yeah, that's you.
Good gracious me. 1966. What a memorable year that was. World Cup. Oh wow. I'm blowed if I can recognise any of the other people there, though. Probably with a magnifying glass, I might. Oh, goodness. Oh, my word. This is exactly how I remember the main hall. Quite daunting, really. Beautiful, beautiful building. But this is where we used to hold the main assemblies in the mornings. And I can also remember the first year that I came here, we used to have films on a Friday night. And it was only for, I think, the first year that I was here. It might not even have been for the whole of the year. But on a Friday night, occasionally, they used to have films. So, yeah, but this hasn't changed at all. These wonderful boards, Simpson Science Prize. I don't think I'm on any of these boards, I'm afraid. Head of school. No, I wonder if there's anybody here that I can remember. No? Oh, Ashcroft. Oh, Mike Hall. Yes, now there. Oh, wow. David Ashcroft, 1969. Mike Hall, 1969. Yes, I remember them. Some of the things come back to you, don't they, when they see these names? Dear, oh dear. Ah, wow. So yes, I didn't get to perform on stage though. I think I got my reading prize presented to me from the stage. That was about the only time I got up there, the only accolade that I had. But yeah, it's good. It's good. And that wonderful organ up there. Yeah. Assemblies in the morning. Come. Oh my goodness me! There he is. Oh, sir, he was fantastic. Foster was another one as well that I can remember. And Mr. Martin, oh my goodness gracious me. Mr. Staveley was the headmaster when I came here. He originally came from Rugby School because he taught Pete. Just to backtrack, Pete was here for 2 years. Then he took the common, I think it was a common entrance exam, which he passed, and that got him into Rugby School. And that's where Mr. Staveley was teaching at that time. I mean, there's 10 years difference between Pete and I. But then when Pete moved on from Rugby School down to Cambridge University, Staveley then came into Lawrence Sheriff as head. And he was headmaster when I first joined. And he was absolutely brilliant. He had the most amazing memory. I'm not sure how many hundreds of students there were in the school, but he could remember everybody's surname, and everybody was known or referred to by their surnames. There were no Christian names at all. It was always Bradley or Smith or whatever. But he had an amazing memory. Yeah, great bloke. Mr. Foster was a teacher at the school that I can remember. And he obviously took over, by the look of it, from Mr. Staveley, but that was long after I had gone. Now, Mr. Martindale, he was a lovely teacher. He also had been at Rugby School, because Pete remembered him teaching at Rugby School. But Martindale taught me English literature. And he was a very, very nice, softly spoken sort of a gentleman. He wouldn't harm a fly, but you had a tremendous respect for him because he had such great knowledge. And yes, I salute you. So Lanchester Polytechnic was a step down from university in a way, in terms of pecking order. But it was situated in the graveyard of Coventry Cathedral, and I spent 3 very memorable years there, studying business law. The 2 things that I remember about Lanchester, well, they had some great groups to appear. Every year they had what was it called? Rag Week. They always had a rag week. And they used to invite special bands to go and perform there. And one of the most memorable was John Heisman's Colosseum, where I first heard the Valentine Suite, which I've got a CD of, which I occasionally listen to when I'm allowed to. But that was a very special moment. But all sorts of groups from the 60s and the 70s. There was Ginger Baker there, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I can't remember. We didn't get the likes, though, of Jimi Hendrix or anything like that. We didn't quite aspire to those heights, but they had some really good groups, I must admit. I commuted each day from Rugby to Coventry for the first year. So I would cycle from home to Rugby railway station, catch the train into Coventry and go to college. The second year I got digs in Coventry, and I shared a room with a Scottish guy, and I left, I'm afraid, on a very sour note. Because I don't know how this came about, and I think it was probably in a slightly alcoholic stupor, but I attended a gig, and I can't remember who played it, but I attended a gig one night, and there was another guy there from the same year that I was on, a bloke called George, can't remember his surname. But we suddenly decided at about 10:30 at night that we would try and hitchhike from Coventry down to London and get back again before the lectures started the next day. Absolutely ridiculous thing to do. So we walked to London Road out of Coventry and hitchhiked successfully down to London. And we then managed to hitchhike back again. Not before the lecture started the next morning, but it was during the morning, as I recall, when we eventually got back, absolutely shattered. And we went to our respective residences. I went back to the digs, and the first thing I decided to do was I needed to have a bath because I felt sweaty. Went to the bathroom, started to run the bath, went into my bedroom and promptly fell asleep. And I was awoken by a loud banging noise from another of the students who lived at the same house, announcing that water was pouring through the hall roof or hall ceiling because some had left the bath running. And this was quite near to the end of term, fortunately, but I was never asked to actually pay for any of the repair, but that was probably another of the most embarrassing moments of my life. Mrs. Atta, who owned the house, was absolute joy, to be honest, in the face of such a traumatic experience. I departed and never went back again. So, yes, 1 or 2 memorable moments at Lanchester. The other thing that I remember was I got into 10-pin bowling. And we would do a charity 10-pin bowl, 24-hour charity 10-pin bowling. And I played with a guy called Eric Fowler. There were partnerships, and I partnered up with a guy called Eric Fowler, who actually I went on holiday with to Norway, drove to Norway, Eric and I. But we did a charity 10-pin bowling each year, which was great fun. And Eric was very good at getting strikes, and I was reasonably proficient. If he didn't get a strike, I was reasonably proficient in getting spares up. So he would leave one pin in the corner, but yeah, good fun. And met up with a few friends, Brian Coggan, who I still send Christmas cards to, and yeah, good times at Lanchester. The objects that mean the most to me, well, top of the list would be this ring. Which was given to my great-grandfather, 1875, then passed on, when he passed away, passed it on to my dad, and it has then come on to me. It shouldn't really have come to me. It was intended to go to my brother Pete's son, David Bradley. But when Dad died, Mum, unbeknown to Dad's wishes, Mum gave it to me. But it has the Bradley family crest on it, and it's got an inscription inside which is almost worn out because there's been so much wear on it. But I believe it's 1875, and whenever I wear it, I always think of Dad. So that is my most precious personal possession. So another object which means a lot to me is the giraffe vase that Celia and I brought back from South Africa. Along with a painting, in fact, of the view from near to Cape Town of the coastal scene. We had great difficulty in bringing them back because neither of them could go into the hold of the aircraft, so we had to arrange for the cabin staff to put them in the cabin. But we just thought the vase in particular looked so beautiful and would be ideal for the fireplace. Another object which means an awful lot to me is a painting, and it's a painting of a car which has a very special place in my heart. And it is a Wedgwood Blue Triumph Vitesse 1972 convertible, and TRW 989J, which is forever embossed in my memory. This in actual fact was my dear Mama's car at one point, but it was kindly offloaded to me when Mother decided that she no longer wanted to drive it. But it formed a great part of my life, and I used it to go to Finland and tour around Finland in it, which was absolutely wonderful. It was used in my courting days with Margaret when we went on trips, and I did use it until I got a company car to go to and from work. But yes, the Triumph Vitesse was a very special motor. That wonderful brass object up there, affectionately known as Wobbly. Now, I first saw Wobbly when I went on a cruise ship, on which TJ, my son Tom, was working. And it was on a Caribbean cruise. And I used to pass this display cabinet in the reception area, I think it was, of the cruise ship, and saw this wonderful fellow with the label Wobbly on the front. And I just stopped to admire it every time I walked past it. And the next thing I know is my darling wife Celia, with assistance from my son Tom, bought it for me. And it has pride of place on the mantelpiece, as you can see, and reiterates and reconfirms again my favourite animal, the rhino. Wobbly. When I left college, Lancaster Polytechnic, like so many youngsters I guess, I didn't really have any idea as to what I wanted to do as a career. I came away with a business law degree, which meant I could have gone into law, private practice or industry, accountancy, private practice or industry, or some form of commerce job. In the end, well, to go into either law or accountancy and private practice, at that time you would have had to have joined a firm of solicitors or accountants and be articled to them, which meant that they would be training you and you would have to almost pay them for the privilege of that training. So you were going to earn bugger all, really, in terms of a salary for 2 years. That was the option on one hand. The option on the other hand was to go with a commercial firm, and I in the end did an interview, a milk round interview with the Royal Insurance Company, and I ended up being offered a job with the Royal in Leicester at what I thought was a reasonably good salary at that time. Don't ask me what the salary was, I can't honestly remember. It might have been £2,000 a year or something of that sort, which was a lot of money, I suppose, in those days. But anyway, that was the one that I took. Looking back, was it the right decision? Well, in many ways, yes, it was, because I wouldn't have had Vicky as a daughter. I wouldn't have had TJ as a son, thanks to Margaret, my first wife. So from that point of view, yes, I think it was the right decision. But if you're just talking about pounds, shillings and pence, probably not, because when I look at some of the solicitors and what they're earning, in private practice, they're earning a lot more, or have earned a lot more than me, and probably live a better lifestyle. But what the hell? But anyway, I joined the Royal, and it was all right. It was all right. I became an inspector, what they call an inspector, looking after country districts, and it was a good start to the career. But in the end, I got a bit bored with it, really. It was a 3-day week, and I thought I need to have a bit of a change. So in the end, I went into insurance broking. And thanks to having worked with an insurance broker, when I was with the Royal, I was looking after a broker called P&G Bland, looking after their commercial insurances for them. And they had a vacancy that cropped up, and they offered me a job working as an insurance broker rather than for an insurance company. And from that point, I never really looked back. Philip and Gilbert Bland were the people that ran the company, and I stayed with them until Philip and Gilbert decided that they would sell out to a bigger organisation. But in the meantime, I'd grown to be a director of the company, so was given a lot of respect. And in truth, I quite enjoyed my time with Bland's. No regrets from that point of view. I should mention that the Royal was where I met my first wife, Margaret. We both worked in the commercial department of the Royal Insurance company, and that was where our sort of friendship started. There was a girl called Sheena Mickleborough who also worked at the Royal in the commercial department, and another guy called Gordon Shawcross, who was ultimately my best man. The four of us decided one year to book a holiday in the Caribbean with a firm called Clarksons. Now, Clarksons, this was just before Clarksons went bust. But we bought a holiday, and Margaret probably will remember this better than me, but I have a feeling the cost was something like 200 quid. But it was, I suppose, there that our relationship started, and it was the most fantastic holiday, fantastic hotel. I know La Toc is still there, but obviously in a different guise. But yeah, it was a memorable holiday, that was. Very lucky. But my days at Bland's, actually, I did enjoy them. It was only when Bland's were taken over that things started to go awry. Philip and Gilbert retired, or obviously were planning to retire. So they then sold out the business to a bigger company, and the bigger company felt that, you know, it had been successful up until then, but they wanted to take it forward, and they could only do that probably with a change of management, directors and what have you. So I was demoted at a time probably probably the lowest point of my life, really. And that was not particularly good. And after that, I just sort of stuck with the job and got the most out of it that I could. But I enjoyed meeting people, and that, I think, is the key with any job, is the people. Not only the people that you work with, because it's the teamwork, really. And they were a great bunch of people, by and large, that I worked with. I was very lucky. But also the people that you meet in meeting clients and discussing their insurance needs. I mean, there were some clients that were absolute so-and-sos to deal with, but the vast majority of them were absolutely wonderful people. So I don't regret, looking back, I don't regret having gone into insurance and insurance broking in particular. Is it the right sort of thing to do in this day and age? Well, as my dad always said to me, everybody needs insurance. Would I rather work for a small company rather than a big one? Yes, I would rather work for a smaller company, because I think if you work for a bigger company, you're a small cog in a big wheel. I think if you work for a smaller company, you're more likely to have your views accepted and possibly put into practice. I mean, we all, as we're growing up and, you know, in your 20s and 30s, you all have views about, you know, the direction you want the company to go in. And sometimes it may not be the view reflected by the management of that company, but they will at least listen to you. And some of the things could be implemented. I can think of one or two things that I suggested to Philip Bland that were implemented, and I became actually one of their star trainers. In truth, I enjoyed training people, and probably that would never have happened if I'd worked for a much bigger company. Because they have their own separate trainers, HR and all that, you know. So, yeah, I think a smaller company is generally better. Watching TJ perform on stage. Watching Vicky get her graduation. I think those are the two most memorable times. Dad passing away. And sad when the marriage broke up, really. But Dad passing away in particular, because he did not want a funeral. So there was never really closure, if that makes sense. And I always thought that was a bit sad. I mean, that was his wish. and we all felt we had to abide by it. But it's strange, really, that it never gave people closure, or never gave me closure anyway, at least. But that, I think, probably was... and the other time, I suppose, was seeing Mum at the nursing home in Scarborough for the last time. When she was, that was a sad moment, really. The condition she was in, not very nice. But... Probably not studying hard enough. I felt I could have achieved more, I think. Not taking enough photos. First getting into the car, learning to drive. Going to the dentist. Having an eye operation. Excited. Oh gosh. I felt excited. Probably going away on holidays. So let's talk a bit about family. Well, I've told you already how I met Margaret at the Royal Insurance Company and how our relationship started. We had a good time together, we ultimately got married and had two wonderful children with Vicky and TJ. And those, I think, that is a great moment in anybody's life. I feel sorry for anybody that doesn't have or can't have children, because it somehow makes life worthwhile, in truth. I felt a huge amount of pride in both Vicky and TJ. They're wonderful. They're wonderful children. They've been very supportive, and a huge amount of pride in what they've achieved, I think. Vicky, first of all, in obviously getting to university, she's touched one or two heartstrings with me when she learned to play the piano, I can always remember playing with Vicky in the back garden at Sycamore Way when she was dressed up in a little nurse's uniform. She'd probably only been about 3, I guess, at that time, but she was absolutely priceless. So yeah, that was lovely. And when TJ came along, I can remember him sitting in front of the television watching Mary Poppins, and jigging away to the chimney sweep, dancing on the rooftops. One of the joys really is the fact that Margaret was a brilliant actress, good singing voice. I come from a background as well where my mum enjoyed acting and a bit of singing. So. And it's been reflected in what both Vicky and TJ have done, because Vicky obviously is into directing her school shows. TJ has done fantastically well in getting to Sylvia Young's. That was a huge, proud moment when he got his scholarship to go to Sylvia Young's, and then appearing in Oliver at the Leicester Haymarket Theatre. And I went to see him God knows how many times as Dodger. That was very special. And of course the cruise ships. working on the cruise ships. So he's fantastic singing voice. The cruise ships were wonderful. I can remember going on a cruise ship when TJ was on Oceania, and to see him perform on the stage in front of the great packed auditorium on a moving ship. Some of the things they managed to achieve on there were just fantastic, really. But it was great, absolutely superb. So yeah, huge pride. Was I a good parent? I've got written down here. Oh dear. Well, I think Vicky and TJ ought to be the judges of that. I suppose, being brutally honest, I could have been a better parent in many ways. One of the things that I am conscious of was that I probably didn't spend quite enough time as I should have done with them when they were growing up. Not only is there a working life to fulfil, but there's also what you do in your spare time. I've always been keen on acting, and I probably participated in one too many stage productions, which, when you think about the time it takes to actually learn lines, then you have to go to rehearsals probably twice a week, as I did with Ratai Cooperative Players, and then there's the week of the play, and whilst it's great, you get a great vibe from performing on stage and the feedback. You're talking 3 months, something of that sort, from the start, the audition, right through to conclusion of the play. It's a big commitment. It's a big, big commitment. And as a result of that, you miss out, I think, on a lot of the home life. The home family life. So from that point of view, looking back, I probably should have curtailed some of my acting exploits with Ratai, and assisted more with the upbringing of Vicky and TJ. And that probably was one of the things that contributed to the downfall of the marriage with Margaret. But everybody makes mistakes, and it's easy with hindsight to look back on these things. In terms of my relationship with Celia, that was quite funny. We met on a sort of what can you call it? One of these magazines, Lonely Heart magazines, I suppose you could call it, you never quite know what you're going to meet. But I can remember meeting her at a pub in north of Leicester, and she was a pharmacist at that time. But we hit it off. We had good times. We had good fun. She was also divorced, and she had 2 children, Holly and Edward. It was a chance for me, really, to get out of what was a very deep hole, I think it's fair to say. We had a lot of holidays together, a lot of fun together. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Did being a parent make me feel any different about my parents? In a way it did, yes. And I think the reason was that I had, looking back, I had a pretty lonely childhood. Because Anne and Pete were so much older than I was, as I was growing up, they were almost flying the nest. So I didn't really. I felt quite lonely, I think, if I'm being honest. I felt quite lonely. And again, going back to the fact that I was never allowed to play outside the garden when I was very young. So I missed that sort of camaraderie of being with other children. When we went on holiday, it was sort of mum and dad would do their sunbathing and leave me to my own devices. So I did try to pay more attention and to foster a better bond, if you like, with my offspring than I felt I'd had with my parents. But I look back with pride and a lot of fondness and a lot of joy. When I was born into the world, it was after the Second World War, and there was a huge community spirit that existed. Everybody was determined to fight their way out of a huge amount of poverty and deprivation, and everybody was singing from the same hymn sheet in trying to, make good and recover from the war. I think now it's got to the stage where there doesn't seem to be as much tolerance and as much respect for people's properties, people's space, and I think that's a sad reflection on the way society is going. Moral standards have, I think, declined an awful lot. And I think the other area is the pace of life. The sheer pace of life now is phenomenal. The speed with which technology, in particular, people are racing all the time, constantly on the go. And I just think there are times when, you just wish you could say, hang on a minute, is what we're doing the right thing to do? Should we be firing rockets off into space, spending billions and billions of dollars or whatever, when we should really be trying to rectify some of the problems and issues that we've got down here on Earth? But it all seems to be part of this great race to try and get ahead. I don't think it was anywhere near as bad in times like the 60s, the 70s. A couple of things that I'm thankful for. The genes I inherited, which have given me good health and sound mind. And the other thing is 2 wonderful children. And a lovely wife, of course. 3 pieces of advice for future generations. Be considerate to others. Be strong, and I don't mean physically strong, but I mean mentally strong. And respect your body and your health. Some things that make me happy. Holidays and going away. Being by flowing water, rivers, canals. If I had any hopes for the future of my family, it would be to enjoy good health, happiness, and longevity. If I had a motto in life, try to live the life you want to lead, and you will then hopefully love the life you live.